Teenagers are often seen as young and harmless, but there are moments when their actions turn dark and violent, leading to deaths that shock entire communities. Behind the ordinary image of youth, there are hidden stories of cruelty and tragedy. In this video, we will look at 5 of the most disturbing cases where teenagers became killers, real stories of lives taken in horrifying ways. It was February 11, 2023 in Warrington, England. 16-year-old Brianna Gay left her house in a white hoodie, her red hair straightened, phone in hand. She looked like any teenager heading out on a Saturday, but within 2 hours, she would never return home. This is the story of 2 15-year-olds who planned the violent death of someone they called a friend. What shocked the country was how detailed their plan was, how coldly they carried it out, and how they acted afterward. Brianna was a transgender teenager who had faced challenges from a young age. Her mother, Esther, remembered her as lively as a child, but by 14, her mental health worsened. She developed an eating disorder, neglected hygiene, and withdrew. She was later diagnosed with autism and referred for ADHD treatment. At one point, she was admitted to a clinic where staff noticed signs of self-harm. She wanted to begin hormone treatment. At first, her mother worried, but after Brianna said she might harm herself if denied, Esther ordered puberty blockers and estrogen online. The pandemic deepened her struggles. She became isolated, followed harmful online accounts, and could no longer manage regular classes due to anxiety. For Esther, things seemed brighter when Brianna grew close to a new friend, Scarlett Jenkinson. What she didn't know was that Scarlett was secretly planning her daughter's death. Scarlett had met Eddie Ratcliffe when they were 11. Even after moving to Birchwood High School in 2022, following an incident where she was caught with cannabis edibles, she remained close to him. At Birchwood, she met Brianna, who studied in a smaller classroom due to anxiety. But Scarlett was fascinated with killers. She used hidden browsers to watch disturbing videos and kept detailed notes about well-known criminals. She confessed to Eddie that she was obsessed with Brianna, and even added her to a list of people she talked about harming. When other targets proved harder, she and Eddie focused on Brianna. Scarlett's fixation turned dangerous. She once gave Brianna red pills disguised as something recreational, which made her extremely ill. Esther later realized it had been an attempt to poison her. Scarlett also spoke of wanting to keep parts of Brianna's body. Eddie, meanwhile, seemed quiet and studious, even excelling in kickboxing. He dreamed of studying microbiology, but also struggled with emotions and autism traits. Despite his image, he was fully involved. During a trip to Bulgaria in late 2022, he bought a hunting knife that would become the weapon. The two exchanged thousands of messages, carefully planning the attack. Scarlett even wrote out a schedule and created a code word, Gay, to signal the start. They chose Culcheth Linear Park, a narrow wooded trail. On February 11th, Brianna followed Scarlett's instructions, even walking over a mile to a specific bus stop. Witnesses later recalled she seemed shy and quiet. She met Scarlett and Eddie at 1:53 p.m. near the library. DNA on soda bottles tied them to the outing. By 2:02 p.m., the group entered the park. They wandered for nearly a mile. Scarlett tricked Brianna with a fake Snapchat account posing as a substance dealer. Brianna grew suspicious, texting a friend that Scarlett seemed to be pretending. Minutes later, Brianna was attacked, stabbed 28 times with Eddie's knife. By 3:13 p.m., a dog walker saw the pair running from the scene. Brianna was found face down, and despite paramedics arriving quickly, she had passed away. Scarlett and Eddie acted as if nothing had happened. CCTV caught Eddie wiping his hands. They dumped Brianna's phone, then Scarlett messaged Brianna pretending concern and even posted a tribute online. But evidence piled up. DNA on the knife, blood on Eddie's clothes, and thousands of messages. Police arrested them the next day. At trial, both blamed each other. Scarlett admitted stabbing Brianna, later describing it as exciting. Eddie claimed he was influenced by her. Psychiatrists later assessed Scarlett with conduct dissocial disorder and Eddie with autism and selective mutism. In December 2023, both were convicted. In February 2024, Scarlett was sentenced to life with a minimum of 22 years. Eddie to life with a minimum of 20 years. At Brianna's inquest in October 2024, her father questioned how much schools knew about Scarlett's past. Her mother said it felt like grieving 2 different daughters, the joyful child she once knew and the troubled teen she became. For prosecutors, the case stood out for how cruelly the 2 teenagers deceived someone who thought they were her friends. It was January 10, 1992, in Madison, Indiana, a quiet town where life felt ordinary and safe. But that night, events began that would lead to one of the most disturbing cases in modern U.S. history. At the center of it was 12-year-old Shanda Scherer. She was cheerful, loved school dances, and was just starting to experience young romance. Shanda had been dating Amanda Heavrin, a classmate she met at Hazelwood Middle School, but their relationship drew the attention of Amanda's ex-girlfriend, 16-year-old Melinda Loveless. Melinda was older, but she struggled to accept the breakup. Her jealousy grew into anger, and it quickly took a dangerous turn. Months earlier, at a school dance in October 1991, Melinda had openly threatened Shanda in front of others. People dismissed it at the time, but Melinda did not let it go. Her past gave some insight into her behavior. Melinda's childhood was filled with instability. Her father, Larry Loveless, was a Vietnam veteran known for violent and manipulative behavior, as well as disturbing misconduct within the family. The home environment was toxic, leaving Melinda scarred by trauma. By the time her father left, she was already unstable, prone to rage, and deeply affected by feelings of abandonment. When Amanda turned her attention to Shanda, Melinda saw her as a rival. Shanda's mother sensed the danger and transferred her daughter to a Catholic school, hoping distance would protect her. But it wasn't enough. On the night of January 10th, Melinda carried out her plan. She enlisted 3 friends, 17-year-old Lori Tackett, 15-year-old Hope Rippey, and 15-year-old Tony Lawrence. Their story to Shanda was simple. Amanda wanted to see her. Believing it, Shanda snuck out of her father's house that weekend and joined the girls in their car. But Amanda wasn't there. Instead, Melinda was hiding under a blanket in the backseat. She jumped out, held a knife to Shanda's throat, and demanded details about her relationship with Amanda. Shanda, terrified, promised to stop seeing her, but things were already spiraling out of control. The group first drove to a local spot known as the Witch's Castle, a ruined stone house where teens often hung out. There, Shanda was tied up, mocked, and robbed of her belongings. Melinda told her she would soon end up buried like others supposedly left there. Fearing someone might see them, they moved her to Lori's home. There, the torment turned more severe. Shanda was beaten, cut, and strangled with a rope until she appeared lifeless. The girls put her in the trunk of their car, but while they sat inside drinking sodas, they heard her screaming. Lori stabbed her several times to quiet her, then returned to perform fortune-telling with her friends, telling Melinda, "Everything's going to be okay." Shanda was still alive. Later, as they drove again, she cried for her mother from the trunk. Lori beat her with a tire iron, even using it in ways that horrified investigators. Still, she clung to life. By the early morning of January 11th, the girls stopped at a gas station, filled a bottle with gasoline, and drove to a remote field. They pulled Shanda out, barely alive, doused her with gasoline, and set her on fire. Afterward, the 4 went to McDonald's for breakfast, laughing as if nothing had happened. Witnesses later recalled their strange behavior. That same morning, hunters discovered Shanda's burned body. Police were called, and soon after her parents reported her missing, the case came together. By evening, Tony Lawrence confessed with her parents present. Dental records confirmed the remains. The girls were arrested quickly. All were charged as adults and accepted plea deals. Tony received 20 years and was released in 2000. Hope got 35 years after an appeal and was freed in 2006. Lori received 60 years but was released in 2018. Melinda also received 60 years and was released in 2019. In prison, Melinda joined a program training service dogs for people with disabilities. She became one of its best trainers. Shanda's mother, Jacques Vaught, even donated a dog named Angel to the program. Melinda trained that dog, saying she did the work in honor of Shanda. Still, the events of January 1992 left a lasting scar. A young girl's life ended because of jealousy, peer pressure, and unchecked anger, an act so cruel it continues to haunt Indiana to this day. It was September 22, 2006 in Pocatello, Idaho. 16-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddart was staying at her aunt and uncle's home to look after their pets while they were away. She was a quiet, dependable straight-A student, trusted by her family. Cassie took the responsibility seriously, not realizing that 2 classmates, Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk, had targeted her in one of Idaho's most shocking crimes. Cassie was a junior at Pocatello High School and had a boyfriend, Matt Beckham. That night, he joined her for company. Later, Matt invited Tori to watch a movie, and Tori brought Brian. On the surface, it looked like a normal hangout, but the 2 boys had already formed a disturbing plan. Obsessed with horror films like Scream, they had created a death list of classmates, with Cassie at the top. Earlier that day, they recorded themselves discussing the plan, In one clip, Brian admitted Cassie was a friend, but said sacrifices had to be made. Tori responded with excitement, suggesting they could target more than one person. They brought knives, gloves, and masks to carry it out. At Cassie's house, they acted like regular guests. They watched a movie with Cassie and Matt for a couple hours, but before leaving, one of them quietly unlocked the basement door. They told the others they were headed to a theater, but instead returned in dark clothing and masks, armed with knives. They began making noises in the basement, trying to lure Cassie and Matt downstairs. When that failed, they tampered with the breaker, shutting off the power. Cassie and Matt were terrified, especially when one of the family's dogs growled at the basement. Matt called his mother, asking to stay the night, but she refused. She offered for Cassie to stay at their house, but Cassie declined. Always responsible, she said she had to remain at her relative's home. At around 10:30 p.m., Matt's mother picked him up, leaving Cassie alone. Minutes later, Brian and Tori cut the power again and crept upstairs. Draper carried a dagger-style knife, Adamsick a hunting knife. They tried to scare Cassie by slamming a closet door, but when she didn't react as they expected, they attacked. She was stabbed 29 times with 12 wounds, potentially fatal. Afterward, the two fled, filming themselves in their car, bragging about what they had done. "Just killed Cassie," Brian said without remorse. 2 days later, Cassie's body was found. Investigators quickly learned Brian and Tori were among the last people to see her alive. When questioned, the boys claimed they had gone to the movies after leaving. But detectives noticed neither could describe the film. Their story collapsed. Brian eventually broke, saying it was meant to be a prank and blaming Tori for going too far. But he led investigators to Black Rock Canyon, where the pair had hidden evidence. Police recovered knives, masks, gloves, clothing, and a burned videotape. Despite damage, the tape showed them discussing Cassie as their chosen victim, and later boasting about what they had done. In court, medical testimony confirmed her heart had been fatally struck. Combined with the tape, confession, and recovered weapons, the evidence was overwhelming. In 2007, both were convicted of first-degree charges and conspiracy. They each received life in prison without parole, plus 30 years. Years later, Cassie's brother Andrew said the family struggled to even speak about her death. Each September brought painful memories. Their mother Anna lived with that grief until her passing in 2022. Brian has since expressed regret in prison interviews. Tori has tried appealing his conviction, but all attempts failed. Both remain behind bars for life. Cassie Jo Stoddart was only 16 years old, with her future ahead of her. Instead, her name is forever linked to the case of the so-called Scream Killers, whose search for infamy ended in tragedy. It was July 15, 2003, in the small community of 5 Points, Alabama. 14-year-old Evan Miller lived at the Country Living Trailer Park. That night, he and his friend Colby Smith walked over to the home of their neighbor, 52-year-old Cole Cannon. Cannon often welcomed company, but what started as a casual evening turned into one of the darkest events the community had ever faced. Inside Cannon's trailer, the three drank alcohol and smoked marijuana. Cannon, who had been struggling with drinking but had recently gone back to church, didn't know the boys had a plan. They intended to rob him once he passed out. When Cannon eventually fell asleep, Miller reached for his wallet. Cannon suddenly woke and grabbed him. In panic, Smith struck Cannon once with a baseball bat. Cannon cried out in pain, but Miller then took the bat and launched into a prolonged attack. Testimony later revealed that Miller repeatedly struck Cannon with both the bat and his fist as Cannon screamed and rolled on the floor. At one point, Miller wrapped Cannon's head in a sheet and said, "I am God. I've come to take your life," before delivering another blow. Cannon was still alive after the attack but severely injured. Instead of helping him, the boys tried to cover their tracks. They attempted to clean up blood and other evidence inside the trailer, then set the home on fire before leaving. Unable to escape, Cannon died inside. An autopsy later revealed he had suffered catastrophic blunt force injuries, but the final cause of death was smoke inhalation. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Miller and Smith. Smith admitted to hitting Cannon once, but said Miller carried out the majority of the attack. Smith also repeated Miller's chilling words in court, which became central to the trial. During the investigation, Miller's troubled past came to light. His sister testified about the severe mistreatment they suffered from their father, including violent punishments. She also described their mother's addiction and neglect. Evan had even tried to harm himself at a young age. Their home life was unstable and full of trauma. Even so, prosecutors argued that none of this excused what Miller had done. They pointed to the calculated way he and Smith targeted Cannon, and then attempted to destroy evidence by fire. In 2006, Miller was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Under Alabama law at the time, this was the only possible sentence for a juvenile convicted of a capital crime. At just 14 years old, Miller became the youngest person in the state to receive that punishment. But his case didn't end there. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. Judges now had to consider youth as a factor, opening resentencing opportunities for about 2,000 people across the country. In 2017, Miller's resentencing hearing began. Cannon's children spoke about their father's death and the years of grief it left behind. They said Miller's apology meant little to them. At the same time, Miller's sister described the mistreatment they endured and how it shaped him. Judge Mark Craig reviewed thousands of pages of documents and delayed his decision for years. Finally, on April 26, 2021, he ruled once again, life without parole. He said the crime showed planning, not impulsive behavior, and that Miller's words on the night of the crime remained some of the most disturbing he had ever heard. Miller, then 32 years old, showed no reaction as the sentence was read. Though his case changed laws nationwide, he himself would not benefit. For Cannon's family, the resentencing closed nearly 2 decades of waiting. Evan Miller will spend the rest of his life behind bars, while the impact of his case continues to shape the justice system. It was July 28, 1999, in Broward County, Florida. 12-year-old Lionel Tate was watching over 6-year-old Tiffany Unick. Tiffany's mother had left her in the care of Lionel's mother, Kathleen Grossett Tate, a Florida Highway Patrol trooper. That evening, Kathleen stayed upstairs while the children ate dinner, played, and turned on the TV. A WWF SmackDown show was airing. Like many kids of that time, Lionel was fascinated with professional wrestling. He often copied the moves he saw, not realizing how dangerous they were. At first, it seemed like playful fun. But before long, the roughhousing turned serious. Kathleen even called down, telling them to quiet down. She had no idea how bad things had gotten. About 45 minutes later, Lionel ran upstairs and told her Tiffany was not breathing. Kathleen rushed down and tried to revive the girl while calling 911. Paramedics arrived and rushed Tiffany to the hospital, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead. Doctors soon revealed the extent of her injuries. Tiffany's legs, feet, and neck were covered in bruises. The damage was compared to being struck by a speeding car. Her skull was fractured, her brain was swollen, her ribs were broken, and her liver was torn apart. Experts testified that these injuries were not accidental. They said the attack lasted several minutes. The case drew national attention. A 12-year-old boy had caused the death of a 6-year-old girl, and the brutality of her injuries shocked the public. Prosecutor Kenneth Padowitz argued that Tiffany's wounds showed this was far beyond child's play. It was one of the youngest homicide prosecutions in U.S. history. The defense claimed Lionel was copying wrestling moves from TV. But the prosecution argued the severity and repetition of the injuries showed she had been attacked, whether Lionel realized it or not. Florida law played a key role. Under the felony murder rule, if Lionel committed an act of mistreatment that could reasonably cause harm, and Tiffany died, that was enough for a first-degree murder conviction. Intent to kill did not have to be proven. In January 2001, when Lionel was 13 years old, he was found guilty of first-degree murder. On March 9, 2001, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Judge Joel Lazarus said Lionel's actions were not childish play, but cold and cruel. He became the youngest American sentenced to life without parole. The sentence caused national debate. Many argued Lionel was too young to face such punishment, while others felt accountability was necessary. In 2004, an appeals court overturned his conviction because his mental competency had not been evaluated. Lionel accepted a plea deal, pled guilty to second-degree murder, and was released after time served. He was placed on 1 year of house arrest and 10 years of probation. At the hearing, Tiffany's mother, Deweese Unick Paul, said her daughter's death was not child's play and not an accident. She forgave Lionel but wanted him to admit Tiffany's death was real and brutal. His attorney said Lionel was remorseful. For a short time, Lionel seemed to have a second chance. But in 2005, he was arrested for an armed robbery involving a Domino's pizza delivery man. He violated probation by having a gun. In 2006, Judge Lazarus sentenced him to 30 years in prison, plus another 10 years for the robbery, served at the same time. Today, Lionel Tate remains in prison. Tiffany was only 6 years old when her life ended that night in 1999. The case remains one of the most unsettling examples of how childhood actions can lead to devastating consequences.